Well, happy Thanksgiving. It is the greatest holiday of all time, so hopefully you are celebrating it to the fullest here. Mike Asti, another edition of Mic Drop, brought to you by the Believe Network and available everywhere you get your podcasts and also available on SiriusXM. As we are going to talk some Pittsburgh Steelers. So Thanksgiving's about food, family, and football. We got to talk football in this edition of the show here, Thanksgiving week, and we got to talk Steelers football. A lot of chatter around the Pittsburgh Steelers, so it's nothing really new. They now are coming off of a loss to the Cleveland Browns. Surprising for some, typical for others. We'll see what they do the rest of the year. A tough schedule ahead, and some conversation about really how Arthur Smith is doing, what's going on this year, and really what their prospects are. We're going to figure out whether they are contenders or pretenders. Again, Mike Asti, Mic Drop here with Believe and SiriusXM. And to have this conversation, I am going to be joined by a Pittsburgh media colleague, a former Pittsburgh sports radio host in David Todd, and now the host of the David Toddcast. You can also find him all over social media. So he's kind of getting back in the game. I'm happy to have him, and happy to have him now aboard the show. David, happy Thanksgiving to you. Are you appreciating? Are you appreciating Thanksgiving? Are you are you doing it big? Or are you skipping it over and getting to Christmas? Because some do.
No, we're doing it big. We're having some folks over tonight, and there's actually a turkey in the oven as we speak that I'm preparing at all the preparations.
I am happy to hear it then. So you definitely are doing it big. Yeah. People that skip it, you're just missing out. So
yeah, I agree.
I'm happy that you are celebrating the glory of Thanksgiving. And as I said, it is about food, family, and football. And if you don't like one of those and maybe don't like your family, just watch more football and hear us talk about more football. And that's what we're going to do here on this show. So I do want to get it started off of what recently went on with the Steelers and losing to Cleveland. It was a snow fest, a game that kind of maybe fell right into the Browns' hands, but also a game the Steelers did lose, and they lose games like that, and that can hurt them seed-wise, the different team, but they did drop the game to the Browns. When you watch that game unfold, did you think that game exposed the Steelers more and maybe showed they were beating weaker teams or really aren't as good as some fans thought they were? Or was that just an aberration? How would you characterize that game to the Browns?
Well, I think it's kind of the season we've been riding this sine wave of performance, and I look, the offense is easy to talk about. It gets talked about all the time because of the quarterback situation. But the thing that is going to make this team an elite team in my mind is if the defense is elite, and we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that for a couple of years. They've been, look, at the end of the day, what matters is the points you give up. And the Steelers have done a relatively good job, until this past week, of keeping teams off the scoreboard. Even if they've given up a bunch of yards, they've created a lot of turnovers, which has obviously been a key. But what we've seen is in big moments, they haven't been able to get off the field. And we saw it against the Cowboys. We saw it against the Browns here in this last drive. So, while if we want to critique individual performances, I don't think we look around and say guys haven't performed very well. But I think as a unit, I think they've been a little bit disappointing. And to me, Mike, coming out of that game, it just, again, raises the question, is this defensive unit going to be able to keep teams in the AFC in the playoffs under 20 points? Because I think that's what it's going to take for them to advance.
Yeah, and you're going to be facing teams that can score, high-powered offenses. You're going to be facing, the Chiefs have been a little less than normal this year, but they're going to score. The Bills are going to score. It's going to be teams that are going to score. Even the Ravens normally are able to score, but maybe not against the Steelers here. David Todd joining me on Mic Drop as we were talking Steelers on the heels of the Browns loss and right now Thanksgiving week. You did mention the defense not stepping up enough, and that definitely could be true. They did steal a game or two earlier in the year, might be the pushback people would mention. And they do that in most seasons, but then towards this point in the year, it definitely dissipates. Is there a reason why you think that is? Because Highsmith has been hurt. That some people can point to. Watt was hurt a lot last year, but Minka Fitzpatrick, who's playing very under the radar, nationally, people are now starting to criticize him, some locally, but he's not nearly what he was when they initially traded for him. are they just having key players get old? They don't have enough stop gaps at other spots. Beanie Bishop, of course, who I covered at West Virginia, he's a rookie that stole the Jets game. But outside of him, is there not enough youth? What do you think is the reason why this defense is maybe not championship caliber?
Yeah, good question. Look, there's no question they've been pretty good. And the question is, are they going to be elite again? So, okay, let's talk about a couple of things you talked about. One is pressure on the quarterback, and I think that's been a key. I think there was a fair bit of talk this week about their sack numbers being down versus what they've been in years past. That is certainly an issue, and we can look at T.J. Watt, and it got asked in the press conference. I think it was our buddy from the AP, I think, who asked the question.
Oh, Will? Okay,
yeah. Will asked about moving TJ around, and I talked about it on my podcast immediately after the game. Is we saw TJ move around a little bit in the Giants game, but TJ for 6 or 7 years is just lined up on that left side, and it's go get to the quarterback. Yeah. And look, teams have decided that rather than have a guy have the impact that he can have, the impact that Myles Garrett had on Thursday night, is they're going to chip with the tight end, they're going to chip with a running back, an H-back, whatever they're going to use, but they're basically going to put two guys on TJ the whole game, and that's going to diminish his impact, and I think it has. And so, okay, factor one right there. Two, Minkah, I think it's a great point you brought up, and the Mike Tomlin has been asked a question, and I think Terrell Austin has been asked it even more frequently about Minkah and his influence, because look, we know safeties, cornerbacks, their stats are offensive dependent, right? If the offense doesn't attack your area of the field, it's hard for you to be a consistent playmaker. Okay, understood. But what we've heard consistently from the Steelers brass is that Minkah is taking away the middle of the field. They're playing him as a deep safety, kind of the over-the-top guy, and teams aren't attacking there. Well, I'll tell you, what we've seen is we haven't seen that many passes straight over the top, but we've seen a fair number of passes in the intermediate to even deep middle. And we've also seen Minkah come up on plays and miss some tackles. So I think the criticism is warranted and valid. And the question, and I think Minkah's been asked about this a little bit too. Well, Deshaun Elliott's been probably better than people, realized or expected coming into the season. I think Minkah needs to be more of a playmaker. And I don't know if that's going to be the Steelers need to scheme him to free him up to do more. But, man, I commented on the fact that, if you're going to have Minkah 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage, he better be knocking down or breaking up those passes that are 12 to 15 yards over the middle, and that hasn't been happening. So those are the two primary things. The other thing is just a general pass rush. I didn't think they got enough pressure on Jameis Winston in the game on Thursday, and I think that was a huge key. I finished with I don't know in those two games they just finished with maybe 5 sacks, but just not getting enough consistent pressure. And having said that, in this game, Mike, getting 3 turnovers, you think that's a guaranteed game winner, win the turnover battle by 2, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, you would think so. Yeah, it was one of those weird games, one of those anomalies, and Jameis Winston had one of those days that it felt like he had a vibe and was destined to get that victory, but it still was a game the Steelers should have won, and maybe it'll come back. We're going to see a lot more of them against divisional opponents. They have the Browns again coming up, and it could be off injuries. It could be off players getting older. The interesting thing about Minkah, and every point you made is true, nationally you hear a lot of, well, he's getting older, so he can't be expected to do too much. He's 28. Yeah, this isn't like he's 38.
Yeah, I mean, that's nonsense.
Yeah, and it could be that early on in his Steelers tenure, when they traded for him, which was a little surprising at the time to give up that first-round pick and bring him in, he was making plays and getting interceptions left and right, even though it was kind of a lost year because of injuries. So maybe the bar is so high, but he is still in his athletic prime. So if he's having trouble being able to do that again or making plays while other teams are scheming against him, then you do need to figure it out. But maybe Minkah is not, Troy Polamalu. Maybe he's not a Hall of Famer. Maybe he had just that couple years early on in his career. That is something to think about now. He's 28 again. He's not 33.
Right. And that's a great point. And I do think it's more scheme than athletic ability or understanding the game. I think it's, obviously some of this had to do with the fact over the past 2 years, you've kind of turned over the secondary. There's
Sure.
kind of getting to know the guys you're with. Dante Jackson, I think he's had an okay season. Joey Porter Jr., obviously, I think we would classify his season as good, but when you're getting flagged a fair bit, that puts the radar on you. And of course, there have been a fair number of penalties, but it comes with trying to generally cover the number one receiver. So, the secondary, I guess I feel like the secondary has performed more or less as expected. But again, I think in the course of our conversation, I think we've sussed out that who would have thought of the three big names on the defense that Cam Hayward would be the guy who's overperforming expectations, and Minka and TJ are maybe the guys, even though TJ's in the defensive player of the year conversation, certainly over the last 4 weeks, are maybe underperforming expectations.
Yeah, and TJ was really right in that defensive player of the year conversation early in the season. You could argue that it's dropped back a little bit. Minka is absolutely a disappointment so far this year, and Cam Hayward, it's hard to expect much more at his age, but right now is one of the better players on the defense. The star of the secondary is the surprising, I mentioned earlier, Beanie Bishop, who is vying for rookie awards and was an undrafted free agent that I covered him. He had a great consensus All-American year at WVU, but I don't think anyone expected this right away. And if you're relying on that being your best player in your secondary, that's where the issues could definitely arise. David Todd here joining me on Mic Drop as we're talking Steelers. And I do want to now pivot. You mentioned everyone's talking about the offense. Well, we are going to have to talk about the offense as well. How do you think the offense has performed? Obviously, a little bit less than it was when Russell Wilson first took over in recent games. You could argue AFC North football and weather, but when he took over for Fields, there was a boom there. Fields and the offense was okay, better than last year, but now the conversation has moved to how is Arthur Smith performing? And I could argue, and I threw it out there, Steeler fans pretty much just always hate the offensive coordinator no matter what, but it feels like the fans are turning on him a little bit, and the same people that loved him in weeks 1, 2, and 3. How do you think the offense really is performing, and how do you think Arthur Smith is really performing for you?
I would say fine, and Arthur Smith's not the problem. Look, I went to town on the decision to throw on 3rd and 4th, throw deep with Justin Fields in the game when the Steelers had a chance to kind of salt that game away, really. And my issue isn't. And I'll make this point, Mike, and I feel like I make it all the time, but I love when teams take shots on 3rd and 4th and short, when they take shots down the field with elite receivers. When you've got
you can usually catch somebody. Yeah, that's how you
right. I mean, you're going to get single man. You're not going to get safety help. They're going to be 8 or 9 guys in the box in those situations. So if you get George one-on-one, or you get Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or whatever, Ben used to do this all the time, and people lose their minds when teams don't convert. But it's a real opportunity for big plays and for points. My problem with this play was threefold. One is this isn't a situation where you needed points. It was 3rd and 4. You were just trying to win the game. So big yardage wasn't the issue. Mike mentioned it. He was asked about it in the press conference. I think, again, maybe it was Will.
Will does ask a lot of solid questions, and he always texts me and says, look out, it's going to be my question everyone discusses again. So tip of the cap to Will Graves.
Yeah. And the question was, the point is on that pass, Mike said, look, it's a better than 50-50 ball. Look, this is 3rd and 4 to win the game. You want an 80% pass. I remember the Steelers went for a 4th down in a playoff game against the Jets, when Ben was playing, and they ran Ben on a roll right with Antonio Brown on the underneath route, and they had an option deeper, and Ben could run for it. And this is the type of situation where, I would have had Russell Wilson in the game. Okay, you don't want Russell Wilson in the game because you're going to consider running the ball, which I'm fine with that too. If your decision is you want to run, great. Roll roll Justin Fields right. I think sorry if I was saying Russ, but Justin Fields in the game. Roll Justin Fields to the right, give him a run pass option, let him figure things out. Even run the play you ran where he had the 30 yards around right end and have a drag route going across with him. And I think that's a fine play call. If you want to throw the ball, that's fine too. But Russ needs to be in the game to make that decision, make that throw. So coming back to the bigger picture, I think the offense is moving the ball fine. They're not turning the ball over. Clearly, they haven't been good enough in the red zone. But I just don't see the offense. I mean, Russ has started 5 games now. I just don't see the offense as being a big problem here where we are. Now, look, these next 6 games are going to be horrifically difficult
100%.
and tell us a lot. But with, kind of the 2 rookie offensive linemen, kind of a young guy in Broderick Jones on the right side, Mike Williams new into the offense. Obviously, Russ just having 5 starts. This to me, it doesn't mean it's not going to be a problem later, but this to me is not the primary problem right now.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. The naysayers of Arthur Smith, even though it's also, regardless, it's just insane and unfair to be evaluating him and some people wanting him fired in the middle of year 1.
That's ridiculous. I mean,
that's the thing that Steeler fans do, and I'm calling him out because it's just the case. But what they would bring up is with the defensive prowess, again, that Jets game and all of Beanie's turnovers and defensive scores, that had 37 points, but some of that was from the defense. If you just look on the offense alone, the only 30-plus point game is against the Raiders. The rest of them are in the 20s, high 20s, and then the recent ones, 19 and 18, even in the win. So that's what they're going to bring up, that if the offense only got you 30-plus one game, the defense had to do it the other game. The defense is now struggling, and as you said, offenses in the playoffs are going to score. Can you score 30 in a playoff game without turnovers from the defense? If not, are you a contender? That would be the naysayer argument.
Yeah, look, it's difficult to argue against any of that stuff. If your argument's going to be you got to score 30 in the playoffs and the defense can't help you, well, it's going to be a tough task. I mean, I don't think teams are going to score 30 against the Steelers in that situation either. So, look, they need to be better in the red zone. I don't love their decision making in short yardage situations. I don't think they have an identity. I don't think they have a go-to play that they can then play off of. I'm not against the 2 QB situation, but teams are going to know if you put Justin Fields in that you're probably going to run the ball with him. So you need to have some options off of that. I did like the idea of them actually trying to throw with him once where he drew a personal foul. I thought at least that showed some creativity, but I do think these are, look, they're not minor in the terms of the game, but in terms of the level of needing a fix and do they have the personnel to do it, I think they do. So if they can improve in the red zone and they're a little bit better in short yardage, I kind of like what I've seen. And when we finally saw the other 2 receivers step up, in this past game, we've seen Calvin Austin do some good things. So I do like the fact that Russ is spreading the ball around. So again, I know this is counterintuitive, but my concern is greater with the defense in terms of reaching its expectation. Now, my expectation is much higher for the defense, but it's greater for the defense in terms of because they're going to have to be the side that carries the team through the playoffs. I think this offense can score 20 to 24 points. That should be enough with an elite defense.
Yeah, and that's been proven with the exception of the Browns and Ravens games that Wilson is getting around that 20 to 24 points. You would also expect the defense when you have somebody looking and vocally wanting Defensive Player of the Year that they got to step up and do more. You're going to have weather in the AFC. If you have a home game in Pittsburgh, which is not a guarantee, but if you're going to have that in the postseason, you're going to have weather. So you do figure that 30 points are not as much of a guarantee for these opponents in the playoffs as they would be in the regular season. So that's all fair too. I do want to just quickly ask you, do you think they're using George Pickens to his fullest? He's a very talented receiver. Some are still expecting off of PTSD from Brown and others, maybe Juju too, that it's eventually going to end bad. He's very talented. They now have other receivers that can force it to not just be double coverage on him, and Calvin Austin stepping up is a big part of that. You have a veteran quarterback in there who now can spread it around. He's had big games, but there's other games where he's not been able to have an impact. And this has kind of been the story of him since he's become a Steeler.
Yeah, look, he's a third-year guy. He's, at times he's shown a level of immaturity that I'm sure raises the hackles for Steeler fans and probably the coaching staff. But I think George has had a really solid season. He's top 10 in the leagues in receiving yards, even with kind of the shuffle at QB. So, the fumble against the Colts obviously hurt.
Yeah.
The silly play of stepping out of bounds when he's trying to get more yardage. There was the personal foul. There are little things we can point to, but George is a He's obviously a unique talent. Maybe not jump at everybody who's trying to tackle him.
Yeah. He's doing the stuff we see at training camp in games, which I don't know if you always need to do. Yeah.
True. So look, he's rough around the edges for sure in a lot of ways, and certainly in front of the microphone as well. But look, I think the Steelers. If you asked most Steeler fans or coaches, said, "Here we are, 11 games into the season. Here are George's numbers, and he's top 10 in the league in receiving yards, and he's got X number of catches," I think you'd take it. I think what we've seen from George is good. Still like to see a little bit more of the root tree and maybe a little bit more in breaking stuff, but we've seen a little bit of that with Russ. So yeah, I got to say I'm generally pleased with where things are with him.
Yeah, and I thought when they drafted him, especially with him dropping a little bit in value because of maybe the issues that we're talking about, that they arguably got a steal, that they got a future wide receiver one. I don't know if we've fully seen that on a regular basis yet, but we definitely have seen flashes, and the numbers are there now. Top 10 is where you want it to be. Could even go more in the future. The talent does not appear to be the problem, especially this year now without having to do the young quarterback, carousel. You do have Fields, who's still young and unproven, but Wilson's been the veteran. Questions on him in Denver, but he's done enough so far with that talent. There's a lot of teams out there, kind of like what you're alluding to, that would trade the Steelers' talent on offense for what they have. David Todd here joining me on Mic Drop on Believe and Sirius XM as we are talking Steelers, the state of the Steelers season here now at Thanksgiving. David Todd, a former Pittsburgh sports radio host and current host of the David Toddcast on YouTube. You can also find him on social. Now, I do want to ask you about the future of the quarterback position. It's a topic that we can always discuss. There are now kind of some rumblings now of reports, some legit, some otherwise, that they're already looking to maybe re-sign Russell Wilson for the future. When people originally thought it was a stopgap thing, they got him for very cheap. The Broncos paying most of it. You bring in Fields for a late round pick. You're trying to get something out of him, but now Wilson's taken over and Fields still very young. They kind of fell backwards into that better situation than a year ago. But next year they may have to decide this all over again. Do you like the thought of bringing Wilson back? What would you do future of this quarterback position wise? Because money won't be as much of a just barely having to pay anything as it is this year for the QB position, and you got to be able to build around that as well.
Yeah, I was going to have to write some checks. Look, I'd go to Russell Wilson, assuming this season, assuming he gets them into the playoffs and performs at the level he is now. So using the data we have right now, I'd go to Russell Wilson and offer him something along the lines of 3 years, $100 million with $60 million guaranteed. Can I figure that out? That's, Mike, I think one of the really interesting things about the NFL is we have the 10 to 15 guys who are clear kind of franchise quarterbacks. And it seems like they're just playing, hopscotch of each guy, who's up being the new highest paid quarterback in the league. And we went 100%. From what was crazy numbers with Pat Mahomes at $45 million to now Dak getting about $60 million. So we've got this group of quarterbacks, and then you've got the kind of the guys on their rookie deals or the $10 million guys. And I think the market inefficiency in the league is the kind of $20 million to $35 million quarterback who is maybe, clearly not a top 10 quarterback. And I think we can say comfortably Russ isn't a top 10 quarterback, but a quarterback who might be able to get you, pretty far into the playoffs if they're playing well. And I think there are a lot of guys like that in today's NFL. So that's the number. I think, $35 million a year for Russ would seem to me to be a doable thing. And then what comes with that, obviously, if you're Justin Fields, is that's nice and interesting. And I'm sure the Steelers would offer him a contract, but I think there are probably enough teams out there that would give him a chance to challenge for the starting job.
Yeah, because then you're really waiting. Where you entered this year competing, everyone kind of figured it was Wilson's job. He got hurt. You could play. Yeah. You showed something to teams, and their relationship's great, and it's all fine and dandy, but I'm sure he's going to not want to just know that he's sitting. Because if you do that, and it's not that it's not smart at all, you then would be guaranteed Wilson would be your guy. There would be no competition, at least for next season. It would be Wilson's show, barring injury. And that, I don't know if, does Fields want to do that when there's other teams that maybe would give him the football now?
Yeah. And look, I mean, he could, I think probably again, maybe ironically, the best thing for Justin Fields might be for him not to take another snap this year. He's put tape out there that he's 4-2,
right.
and I think Mark Caboli listed this in his mailbag yesterday that you can list 10 teams that are going to have a situation next year. Like, would you like to bring him in and compete for the job on a whatever it would be, a 2-year, $25 million deal? I don't know. He's going to be another guy who I think he's not going to get. I think he deserves more than kind of backup money of $7 or $8 million a year, but you're not going to pay him starter money of $40 million a year. So where in that huge range are you going to find the dollars for Justin Fields? If I'm the Steelers, I'd offer him 2 years and $20 million, 3 years, $30 million in a heartbeat. But I'd be really surprised if that was something that attracted his interest.
Yeah, I would definitely think, and that is a great point. His agent might be secretly, hoping for it as well, because the more he plays, the value really only can come down, unless he somehow really skyrockets. But
I guess if Russ gets hurt and he were to come in and win a playoff game,
right? Sure.
Then obviously, then the numbers just flip. You say, you pay Justin that contract that you were going to give Russ.
Yeah, sure, 100%. And I do think this adds a little bit of a monkey wrench that we won't fully have to get into the offseason, because the Steelers' plan clearly was you bring in the veteran, he does it for 1 year, you see what you got in Fields, and then maybe Fields is the guy for the future, and you're not figuring Wilson has another 4 years left in him, even if he has this year being okay. He's played better than people would have thought so far. He still is young enough. We're seeing quarterbacks go into 40s. He now vocally wants to keep playing, because that was a question before, if he wants to be a celebrity or keep playing. If he wants to play and he does this, at least to this level, with the exception of the divisional games, which no one usually puts up major numbers in, it's hard to let him go, be a veteran. I mean, there are teams that you mentioned Cabali's mailbag. I'm sure the Jets would take him for a year or two and have some veteran stability. If Rodgers goes, and they're not even finding that with Aaron Rodgers. So that is going to bring up, the Steelers just are continuously in this quarterback controversy since Ben, and that will be the case again. And then what you do behind him, if you get him to agree to that and Fields is gone, you're likely drafting a QB. So if Wilson does get hurt, there's not the stability, or you're bringing in somebody else, but who that guy would be.
I think Kyle Allen would be a capable number 2. And as you say, if you draft a guy in the third round, maybe you draft a developmental guy. I think there are guys there. I do think, obviously, you'd like to have this sorted out when you get to the draft, which I imagine we'll know the answer for the starting 2. So Kyle Allen and a young guy, I think that's a workable situation.
Yeah, that's fair. David Todd again, former Pittsburgh radio host right now of the David Todd Cast. So as we round things out, a couple things. So number one, I just want to get your take, because this is a constant polarizing conversation around Mike Tomlin. It clearly now is he's going to finish out this deal and be the Steelers coach for really as long as he probably wants to be. There's been people who've wanted him fired for years, but that was never going to happen. That's just not what they do. They are, once again, a team that's winning this year. You could put holes in it if you want off the schedule or whatever, but he's doing enough that no one's firing him right now. And the conversation nationally of just defending him for everything versus locally of maybe, trying to poke holes in literally everything and some slandering him is just always so far from each other. So somebody who's been covering the Steelers for a long time, I won't date myself on you, but you were covering even when I was in high school and college. Where are you on Tomlin's Steelers legacy? Do you think he is a Canton future Hall of Famer that, like, I've already been writing about? I think he's locked in, but where are you on that? And then how much longer do you think he's Steelers coach, which almost is how much longer do you think he wants to do this?
Yeah, I've been on a rolling 5-year time horizon with Mike Tomlin since probably 2015 or so. I always say my line used to be 5 years from now, Mike will be the head coach and Ben will be the quarterback. Well, obviously, Father Time catches up to the quarterback, but not to the head coach. So Mike will be the coach 5 years from now. And I that's as far as I'm willing to look, but give me 2029. He'll be the head coach. He'll be in Canton at some point. Certainly his legacy starts to tarnish here without playoff victory. So in the next couple of years, Mike needs to win playoff games. Winning another Super Bowl would put him in kind of elite top 20 coaches in the history of the game type stuff. So the trajectory on that side, it's very clear. If he wins a bunch more playoff games and another Super Bowl, he's in the, he supersedes Cowher, I think, and it still has room to go to be with Chuck Noll because of all the Super Bowls. But he's in the top 20 coaches in NFL history type thing, because he's probably going to end up at least in the top 10 win list.
I was going to say, if he wins a second ring, I probably could argue it's top 15, top 10, even at that point.
Sure.
I mean, because then you're having to get it several playoff wins during that year. You figure he's going to be, well over 200 wins at that point if he keeps going and does this for 5 years. He's 52 right now. He looks good. He's a young 52 in terms of how he looks. He'll be 57 if you're projecting him. The question is how much longer he's going to want to. They're not going to cut bait with him right now. The Steelers don't fire head coaches.
He's not going to leave. If Mike Tomlin, honestly, if you
what's a better job for him? He cut the people trying to rumor him to USC last year. That's just ludicrous to go from the Steelers.
Yeah. I don't look. It's not a money thing. He said that before. He's making $16 million a year. Right. There are probably only a handful of coaches getting paid more than him at any level. So it's not a money thing. He's not going to tire of this. Look, Mike, if somebody said, I'll give you 10-1, is he going to be the coach when he's 65 years old? Hell yeah. Put me down for 100 to win 1,000. I'm in.
That's a good bet. That's a long way from now, but I'll try to remember that. Yeah. And when you think about it too, the people because even when I wrote this last week, you get tons of replies that he's Hall of Very good. If you look at Tony Dungy, if you look at Cowher, the coaches that are in the Hall of Fame now, Tomlin's resume is already right there. Like, you can say there's been underachieving. I mean, my first playoff game that I covered was the Jacksonville postseason loss. That's an underachieving loss. That's going to be a bullet against him on his resume. They shouldn't have lost that. There are moments like that. You can say they didn't win a ring when they had the best players at given positions and the killer bees and people arguing for top 5 at those positions. Sure, you can say that, the championships or the championship was early and the other Super Bowl appearance was early in his career, and it's not been that since. The playoff drought is bad, but the overall body work is there for Canton. He does need to win playoff games. I mean, Rooney on down even publicly said that this year. That wasn't said in years earlier. So clearly there's a directive to do that. And even if it doesn't happen, though, he's still going to Canton someday. Yeah. But that conversation's never going to die out until he probably wins a playoff game. When he wins a playoff game, maybe it'll calm a little bit.
Yeah, you'll get a little bit of that. And look, this is a year with the AFC where you could tell me if you told me any of 6 or 7 teams represented 100%. The AFC in the Super Bowl. Wouldn't surprise me. You could tell me the Ravens. You could tell me the Chargers. The one that would surprise me is the Texans. I don't think the Texans will be in the Super Bowl. Okay. But literally, I mean, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Steelers. If the Bengals won the rest of their games, you tell me they sorted their defense out. I mean,
yeah. I mean, they could easily be 7-4 instead of 4-7. I mean, they were close in some of those games.
And look, Denver's probably not going to be there. But Bo Nix is playing great. So the other argument is, you look at these quarterbacks, the way Nix is playing, you could say, look, Russ is playing fine, and he might still be the 7th. Or, C.J. Stroud might be the worst quarterback in the group, coming off an amazing rookie season. Of the 8 guys we're talking about, I mean, you've got elite quarterbacks almost across the board.
Yeah, that's wild to say because of how great it was last year. Some were thinking the Texans were a sexy pick because of that, and that's fallen off. And he's fallen off. But, I mean, even at the falling off point, it's still looking to be a solid career for him. So, yeah, it is wide open this year. And the schedule is going to be really proving to whether the Steelers are going to have a solid seed, maybe could have a home playoff game, maybe could win a playoff game. Part of the problem, as you know, during this slump and drought of not winning a playoff game, they would drop games like the Browns game. They would end up as a low seed. They'd have to go on the road like Buffalo last year, and then it's a snow crapshoot, and they're the worst team, and they lose, and then you're kind of done, and no one expected them to do anything. If they want to win playoff games, they got to get some of those, and they got to be a seed with either a home game or in a better situation where it's not always the worst matchup possible. And that's kind of been the story.
Look, I think with the step forward at quarterback, that the 100%. Ability to win a playoff game is completely different now. I just think it's, where they were the past, at the end of Ben's career in the past few years. It's just you're right. You're staring up a mountain. But now with this group, give me a healthy team in the playoffs, and they're even money with most of these teams.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely is fair. I was kind of going to close and ask you where you think the Steelers do stack up in the AFC. You kind of talked about it, but it's very, very wide open this year. The Chiefs are not what they were the last couple of years, even though they're getting lucky. And the Bills have proven to lose in the playoff despite being very, very good. There's nothing that guarantees the Steelers can't win a playoff game, but there's also a possibility they lose some of these games in the schedule. They lose right away. They don't go anywhere in the postseason. And if that happened, I wouldn't be surprised either.
I agree with everything you said. If you ask me right now who the best team in the AFC is, I'm still going to say the Ravens. The Steelers have their number, but they showed me something defensively the past 2 weeks that if they get good defensive play with that offense and the ability, with what Lamar's done and Derrick Henry and kind of the offensive weapons they have, I think they're the best team. That I think the Bills are the second best team. And then, who's the third best team? It's a crapshoot. Look, I'd rather, if I'm the Steelers, what are you going to say about Pat Mahomes? I mean, look, you never want to play him.
You don't want to play the Chiefs.
I don't want to play the Chiefs, but,
right.
I think all these teams are dangerous. But look, I think the Steelers, and I think we're going to see this kind of starting this week against the Bengals. I think the Steelers offense still has some room to grow. And if they play well, I think the Steelers are going to be tough out in the playoffs as well. So, look, I'll just rank 1, 2, and 3 as the Ravens, the Bills, and the Chiefs. But everybody else who gets in is going to be dangerous. X the Colts, X the Texans.
Yeah, and also this game against the Bengals is big for the sense of you really get the mentality of the Steelers on how dangerous and how much of a threat they are. Because even though we're saying the Bengals have talent, Joe Burrow is having a year that if you take the wins-loss record away, he's MVP of the league, and it sucks that they haven't been winning. But if you beat them, you're basically burying them because you're getting too far behind the 8 ball. If you let them beat you, even though you're still in the playoff race, they could start coming alive and clipping wins, and then you're throwing them into that top 4 or 5 mix. And then in the playoffs, it's not like it's out of the question the Bengals could win a playoff game. We've seen them do that with Burrow. So you kind of got to get rid of them as quickly as possible.
Look, you felt like they had to win 2 of these 3 games in the AFC coming out of the bye, and they didn't go the way they expected. But if the Steelers take care of business in Cincinnati, by the way, they're a 3-point dog in this game.
Yeah.
If they take care of business in Cincinnati, they'll be in a great spot for a difficult finish, but go 2 and 3 the rest of the way, and you're set. And you'll win a home game. You win 11 games, you're going to be.
That's the key. Getting a home game. That's really the key to try to get this playoff drought, off Mike Tomlin's back. Because regardless of where you go, if you get a playoff win, I think he would calm down a little bit of the slander that does go on, even if some nationally are maybe trying to over accentuate and defend him a little too much. And I'm not a Bengals fan by any means. I don't even cover Cincinnati sports at all here. But watching the Bengals and the way they've been losing, it almost pisses you off. Like, it's almost frustrating.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, like, I almost am annoyed myself watching it. So we'll see what they do. They like to blow games. And if you're Burrow, it's amazing that he hasn't flipped out because it's just ridiculous with the way they've been blowing games this year. But it is big. I imagine the whole league, the whole conference is going to be rooting the Steelers on hard in that game to get the Bengals out of the picture.
Interesting. I don't disagree. And I'll tell you, the Steelers defense really showed something against the Ravens. And again, controlling Lamar Jackson. If they can do the same with Joe Burrow, hats off to them. That will be a feather in their cap, and certainly will raise kind of the Steelers 100%. Profile again as 9-3. And look, we talk about the difficulty of the schedule, and it for sure is. But other teams are going to have tough games as well. We've got tomorrow night Miami, who's playing really good football, playing in Green Bay. That's going to be an interesting one, and we'll see how things go.
Yeah, and the Steelers did what they have to do. This is what Mike Tomlin would say, and maybe they didn't always do in past years where they dropped early season games. Their schedule was clearly, everyone knew this, was going to be easy at the beginning of the season and hard at the end. And maybe they don't like that, but they took care of business in the beginning of the season. I mean, you're sitting 9-3 right now. You don't want to lose the Browns, but outside of that game, you got to be happy with this record. And it does get you at least in the playoff conversation, in that top tier conversation, even though the hard schedule's in front of you. There's a lot of teams, the Bengals we mentioned, that lost to bad teams, and now they're trying to fight it out with a tough schedule. you did take care of business against teams you're supposed to beat, which is all you got to do. And it's easier said than done, whether we're talking college or pros, because there's a lot of teams that have not done that over the years and are not doing that this year, and that's causing problems for them. David, I appreciate the time, man. Hope you and your family do enjoy Thanksgiving. I know you're doing it big, so keep on doing it big. We'll have you back on the show, and let me know if you need anything from me as well in the future.
Great, Mike. Great to be with you. I really enjoyed it, and happy Thanksgiving to you and all your viewers and listeners.
All right, man. David Todd again. He is a former Pittsburgh sports radio host. He's been covering the market for a long, long time. I wasn't joking. High school and college, I was growing up around the area in Pittsburgh and then in college in the region, and he was covering. So definitely respect to him. He's still doing it with the David Todd cast on YouTube, and you can also find him all over social media. Let me get his actual handle plugged here. Well, there it is. Easy. At David M. Todd. So the middle initial in there. At David M. Todd on X. I know he also has another handle for his Pirates coverage, as you certainly can talk and cover the entire market. Again, a former radio host with 970 in Pittsburgh and now doing his own thing. So appreciate David Todd for jumping on the show as we talk a lot of Steelers. This is Thanksgiving. This is a barometer for how good these teams are in the NFL. This is contender or pretender season. Steelers have a solid record. They didn't look that great in these divisional games. They're always going to be important. You can argue, okay, it's Browns and weather. We're going to see what they're really made of because they dropped this to the Bengals, who are a good team despite their record. Then they're really going to have the naysayers get really, really loud, and the schedule may bite them enough that they are once again on the road. They once again can't win a playoff game. I get it. They're in the playoff race now, and they're probably headed there based on where the record is and what everyone else is doing. But you got to win a playoff game. You got to just win a playoff game. You can't just get in the postseason. You can't get in and say, it's Buffalo on the road and snow, so whatever happens, happens. You want to win. You want to have the game at home. You need to get some playoff victories. And as much as David and I can go all day on Tomlin's a Hall of Famer regardless, his resume is similar to Cowher and Dungy, who are already there. The people are too hard on him in a way. They do slander him. They do ignore the years where he wins more than maybe he should with talent. They do ignore getting close to the playoffs with Mason and Duck, and even so far this year, they do maybe ignore that managerial-wise, either Kevin Colbert or the franchise maybe messed up the end of Big Ben's tenure and put him in this QB mess, and it wasn't all Tomlin. And we also acknowledge, of course, that Tomlin did lose some playoff games he shouldn't have lost. He did lose that Jacksonville playoff game he shouldn't have lost. He had dropped games like the Browns game this year that made it tougher on him in the postseason and seed-wise that then ruined those years. And he did not win a ring with Ben, AB, and Le'Veon Bell together. They, got to one with AB early, and Ben has the ring. Has the two rings from before, one with Cowher and one with Tomlin, but they didn't win a ring when all three of them were together. They were against the Patriots dynasty. Now they're against the Chiefs dynasty, but that's not an excuse. The fans want at least a playoff win, let alone championship. So we get all that too, but a playoff win would calm down some of that noise, and he's already locked in to be with the Steelers as long as he wants, but it would at least calm down some of that noise. But there's no guarantee that happens either. A tough schedule ahead. So we talked a lot about the Browns loss and the Bengals ahead here. If you're watching this after the fact, this will be up there on the Believe Network mic drop page for all eternity. So you can certainly listen and watch this archive-wise as well as on my social and my YouTube, etc. So if you are doing it more for the evergreen conversation, after that coming up, Bengals game after Thanksgiving, post-Thanksgiving weekend there, you're going to have another opportunity at the Browns. That one's at home. That is a must-win for sure, just for vibes. You lose on the road in Cleveland because of weather, okay. You got to win the home game. Weather might be bad again, but you got to figure it out. You're the better team. They're not good. You can't drop both. Then you have the Eagles, who look like a legit Super Bowl threat, an NFC threat once again. Saquon Barkley is gashing folks, and that is an understatement. He's a Penn State product. He's going to want to come into Pittsburgh and do it big. So that is an issue, or actually that's games in Philly, but you get what I'm saying. He's going to want to do it against the Steelers for sure and kind of own the state. They are a good team. That's going to be rough. You have the Bengals matchup, or you have the Ravens matchup, I'm sorry, and obviously that's always going to be a problem when you have the Ravens matchup, and that one is on the road in Baltimore. You then have the Chiefs, who have been more lucky than good, as David and I were talking about, but they still got Patrick Mahomes. They're still good. They still have a coach in Andy Reid who is higher than Tomlin in any all-time rankings, as well as Cowher, and maybe flirting with Nolan Company for best coach of all time if you look at his body of work and Andy Reid. They don't lose at the end of the years. They get better and they win titles. They're poised for the playoffs once again. That'll be rough on December 25th. And then the Bengals again. Bengals might be dead then. Or if the Bengals beat you and keep on fighting and scratching and clawing, they might be really trying to get in the postseason at that point. They might be better at that point, and they might want to drop you off seed-wise. That game could matter. Maybe it won't. It depends on what you do against the Bengals on December 1st before you get to January 5 and how both teams fare the rest of the way. But that is not an easy schedule. They do need to win most of those. They're not going to win all of those. Breaking news, they're not going to win all of those. And they do need to win a playoff game. There's a directive to do that. There's a sense of urgency to do that. There's no guarantee that happens. Doesn't mean Tomlin's not headed to Canton if they don't do it. It doesn't mean the future's crap if they don't do it. They did get enough out of Wilson this year. I do agree to try to offer him a deal for next year. But it does mean the defense needs to step up and give you more. It does mean they need to do more offensively outside of what they did in those divisional games. Certainly when you play the Chiefs, the Ravens and Eagles, and even the Bengals, you're going to have to score. Maybe the Browns, you don't. That kind of was probably an aberration on the Jameis Winston game that happened in Cleveland. But a lot still ahead of the Steelers, a lot more to talk about, a lot more to debate about, a lot more noise is going to surround the Steelers nationally and locally, as it always does. And keep it right here on Mic Drop. We're going to talk about it. So this has been another edition of Mic Drop, powered by the Believe Network and available everywhere you get your podcasts and SiriusXM. Again, thanks to David Todd for joining me for this conversation. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Do Thanksgiving big like David and myself. We both are. You should too. It is the greatest holiday of all time. It is about food, family, and football. What more could you ask for?